Hi, I'm Jane and I'm here to talk to you about reflective writing. Reflective writing can be a tricky form of writing, and it's one that students do often dread. But there are certain traps with reflective writing and common mistakes, so in this video we'll look at what those typical mistakes are and show you how to avoid them. Okay, so if you want to write well in your reflective reports, you need to have a clear understanding of what reflection is. Put simply, reflection's where you analyse something that's happened in order to learn from it, so that you can then use that learning to improve your practice. So let's break this down. If you're reflecting, you'll look back at something that happened, and now this could be, for example, when you were working with a service user or when you were working within a multidisciplinary team. Then you'll analyse what happened. Now we'll come back to this later, but this means thinking in depth to help you explain what happened or reach new understandings. Then you'll think carefully about why it happened and what you can learn from it as a practising professional. To understand why something happened, you often need to draw upon other sources, and this could be the perspectives of others or relevant literature. Now, completing your reflective assignments isn't just another tick-boxing exercise. It's really important for your professional development. If you think about it, you get better at things by learning from your mistakes, your successes, your failures. And that applies to your skills as a practitioner. What reflection does is it gives you a structured way to think through your experiences so that you can then learn from them and become more self-aware and then improve your practice. The bottom line basically is that reflection's not a skill that you can avoid. It's ongoing throughout your university coursework and professional career, so it's worth taking the time to understand what it's all about. Right, so now we're clear on what reflection is. Let's move on to reflective writing. Reflective writing is a written analysis of an experience that's been thought-provoking for you in some way. Now this could be, for example, an interaction with a service user, your performance in an exam, or your experience of working in a multidisciplinary team. It can be a challenging form of writing because it involves you thinking and writing about your personal experiences, such as your anxieties, your mistakes and successes. And for many of us, this doesn't come easily. So what are the characteristics of reflective writing? Well, unlike traditional academic writing, reflective writing uses the first person or I, which might seem strange at first. Like traditional academic writing though, reflective writing needs to be as formal and well structured as any other written assignment. It shouldn't include any informal language or use a chatty style. Reflective writing should make links with the literature, so it should include some references. We'll come back to that later though. And it should clearly show what you've learned from the process. This could be new understandings or values or unexpected things that you've learned about yourself. So what should you avoid in reflective writing? Well, by far the most common mistake is to simply describe an experience rather than analyse it. This applies to you then. You've probably had feedback along the lines of lack of critical analysis or not enough depth. But achieving depth in reflective writing really does take a lot of practice. And the trick is to ask yourself questions that will get you digging into a deep level of analysis. Now these questions are often the why questions. So for example, why you behaved as you did in a particular situation or why you felt the way that you felt. So when you're reflecting, you're unpacking an experience to try and make some kind of sense of it. Reflection's not where you simply mull things over in a superficial way. It's where you purposely think about something that happened so that you can understand it in more detail. To help you get your head around what we mean by deep analysis, have a look at this example, and you can pause the video while you do so. In the superficial analysis, the reflector simply thinks about what happened. But in the deep analysis, the reflector also analyses what happened. And this analysis allows the reflector to learn from the experience, in this case that they were more skilled than they'd realised. Knowing where to start with reflective writing can be a challenge, but thankfully there are various models that can be used to help provide structure to your reflections. One of the most commonly used models was identified by Gibbs in 1988, and as shown in the diagram, this model guides us through the reflective writing process, where you start by describing the event that you're reflecting on, then you go on to describe how it made you feel and what was good or bad about it. The tricky bit then comes next when you analyse what happened and try to make sense of it. After that, you're ready to conclude and develop an action plan to show how you would use the learning in your future practice. In the rest of this video, I'm going to talk you through the different stages of the Gibbs cycle, and we'll show you some examples of good and bad reflective writing. First part of your reflective account, the description, is the easy part. Here you should describe what happened. So for example, you might describe where you were, what you were doing, and who else was there, and what significant things happened. The key here is not to provide too much detail, but enough just to set the scene. And a common mistake here is to use up too much word count with too much unnecessary detail. Alongside your description, you should describe how the situation made you feel. Try to avoid simply stating that you felt good or bad. You need to try and provide enough depth. So for example, what emotions did you go through from start to finish? Which one was the strongest? And how did you feel about the outcome? How did others influence your feelings? Again, this section shouldn't take up too much word count and should be one of the shortest sections of your report. In the evaluation section, you should come to some kind of overall judgment about what happened. So for example, what was good about what you did or what didn't go so well. To show that you're being critical in your thinking, consider good as well as bad aspects of your experience. You'll usually find that there's something good that you can say as well as areas that you could have improved on. Try to avoid simply stating that you did well or not so well. You can add some depth by explaining what it was that you did that was good or maybe not so good. Now, up until this stage of the cycle, there hasn't been much analysis required. It's been fairly straightforward description. But once you get to the evaluation, you're starting to get into some kind of analysis. So from here, it starts to get a little bit more tricky. Here we have some good and bad examples of an evaluation section of Gibbs's model. Again, you can pause the video while you read through them. Note how in the good example, the writers provided depth by explaining what he or she did that was good and demonstrated critical analysis by considering an area that he or she could have improved on. The analysis is the most challenging part of the reflective cycle, where you really need to stand back from the situation and think about what you can learn from it. Up until now, the reflective cycle has got you asking the what questions, so what happened, what was good or bad about what you did, etc. But to properly analyse and learn from your experience, you need to dig deeper and start asking the why questions and the how questions. One way to achieve a deep level of analysis is to go back through the event that you're reflecting on from start to finish and ask yourself questions along the lines of, well, why did I behave like that? Why did I feel like that? What made me think that? What assumptions and values did I bring to the situation? How did my thinking affect my behaviour? Why didn't things turn out as I expected? How will this impact on me? These kinds of probing questions are very challenging, and you certainly won't arrive at an answer quickly. But by probing in this sort of way, you will get yourself thinking deeply, and remember that good reflective writing requires that deep level of thought. Here we have bad and good examples of analysis sections. Notice how in the bad example, the writers made the common mistake of failing to demonstrate any depth or analysis. They've just made a big statement about what they've learned from the experience without showing how they arrived at that learning. In the good example though, the writer has shown that they've really thought hard about the experience by thinking about the assumptions that he or she brought to the situation and how these were challenged. Another important part of the analysis stage is to make some links with reading material. So here you might include some theories that could be relevant in explaining why things happened the way they did. So for example, if you behaved in a certain way when communicating with a service user, you might consider what the literature says about how to communicate effectively with service users and what strategies are recommended and how they link with what you did. You're not expected to have lots of references in a reflective essay, but the marker does want to see that you can make links with your experiences and with what the literature says. Many students do get poor marks for reflective assignments because they don't bring the theory and the experience together, so make sure that you do pay attention to this part of reflective writing. Going back to our previous example, this slide shows how the writer's drawn upon the literature to support his or her reflections. You can pause the video while you read through it. Once you've written your analysis, the hard bit's done and you're ready to write the conclusion. The conclusion, in comparison to the analysis, is a relatively short section that sums up what you'll take away from the experience. Here you can really show that you have analysed by thinking widely about what you've learned. So for example, you might have learned some things about yourself and your own specific ways of working in the workplace, but you might also have learned some things about other people or the workplace more generally. So try and think as widely as you can when you're writing your conclusion section. Here we've got a good example of a conclusion, and notice how the writer mentions 3 things that he or she's learned from the experience. And this indicates to the person who's marking the report that he or she has put a good level of thought into it. The final part of Gibbs Cycle is the action plan. And this is where you develop a plan that will help you take what you've learned from the experience and use it to improve your practice. Here are the keys to convince the reader that you really are willing to learn from the experience. And the key to that really is to come up with an action plan that lays out the specific steps that you're going to take and when you're going to take them. So a really common mistake would just be to simply say, for example, that next time you're going to be more confident or next time you'll be less anxious. Obviously these kinds of statements are far too general and they're not very convincing. What the reader wants to know is how you will be more confident next time or less anxious. So you need to think hard about what things you could do to help you achieve these changes. Here we have good and bad examples of action plans. In the first example, the student has said what he or she intends to do, but it's not very convincing. They haven't explained how they will stop making assumptions or how they'll become more aware of their body language. But notice how in the good example, it's just much more convincing because the writer has explained how they will attempt to improve their practice. Notice how the writer's been quite specific by, for example, saying that they'll read a particular chapter of a book within a particular time frame. And this all helps leave the reader with a sense that the writer really does mean what they're saying. Now, once you've finished writing the action plan, you've completed the Gibbs cycle. And we'll now move on to highlighting the key points of this video. The key points of this tutorial are that reflective writing is about exploring an experience in order to learn from it and improve your practice. It uses the first person and should have a formal style, just like any other piece of academic writing. Good reflective writing demonstrates a deep level of analysis, it makes links with the literature, and it demonstrates evidence of learning from an experience. There are various models that can help you structure your reflections, and the key sections of these are a description of the event that you're reflecting on, and then an analysis of what happened and what you've learned from it, and finally an action plan to improve your future practice. The analysis section is the most challenging to write and does require you to dig deep by asking yourself the why and the how questions, which will then allow you to arrive at new understandings. And finally, remember that markers want to see that you have learned something from the experiences that you reflect on, and you can demonstrate this by writing a convincing action plan that details how you intend to improve your practice based on what you've learned.